Juan, how you doing, man?
Good.
Good.
Yeah.
We're last one of the day. Thanks for sticking around, everybody. I think my children are in the audience. So, how you doing, little girls? So thanks for sticking around. I'm excited to talk about this category because, one, I don't oftentimes get to be up here, and not that I'm like seeking the glory or anything, but I really oftentimes don't have much to say. We have the real experts here at FreightWaves that'll host these events, and I kind of like to be out of the limelight. But this is a little different one. Like with what you're doing with grip shipping and the perishable supply chain, that's an area where I do have some experience, and we talked about that before. But I thought it was so interesting to hear a little bit about your story, because we didn't used to ship anything via, at least on a direct-to-consumer basis, over in the mail, over parcel, any LTL like that. But your career has tracked that whole life cycle over the past decade, starting at ButcherBox and into grip shipping. Do you want to talk a little bit about like kind of what your story looks like and how you made it here in the end?
Yeah, totally. So first off, someone at lunch told me, wish me luck because I was going to be the last thing standing between all of you and beers. But, that's fine. I like a challenge, so I'll take it. Let's do this. So, when a ButcherBox, so for those of you who don't know, bootstrap company, company that got to a very significant scale in size for the last decade. And for us, we didn't really have a lot of money in the bank to play the game of, hey, we're going to send out, 5, 6, 7 boxes, and we'll make money at some point. That was not the game you were playing, and you come from the industry, so a lot of companies were, that's the financial model that they were playing with all the financial backing. But, for us, we really had to make money on box one. That was always the way that we were operating. But for that, that means that you need to get very complex when it comes to the logistics and shipping strategies that you're implementing, and how are you backing that up with all the data, the modeling, and then all the software engineer that you need to support that. So for us as a company, we got very complex very fast when trying to solve for that problem. But for me personally, as head of the logistics department, I always had a question in the back of my mind of, hey, why are we spending millions of dollars internally to solve this when we should just be plugging into something that solves this for us? Because as a company, you're much better off, spending the resources where it matters the most for you as a brand and your consumers, which is, in the ButcherBox specific case, it's a meat company, it's a meat brand. So, those resources are much better, well spent into the marketing department, into sourcing, into finding the best possible product, into the front end of that website to make sure that you're increasing your conversion rates. But to be able to do that, you need the back end. And the back end, if you can just plug into something that makes that work for you, I think that's, life-changing for a lot of these startups or companies that ship perishables in the mail. At the same time, if you look at consumer trends for the last decade in this specific industry, when we first started and when we were in the industry, I played it as well, to begin with, it was an uphill battle for people to understand that they can now buy something in the mail and it arrives to them cold or refrigerated or frozen. It was not common knowledge before. Now it is. Now the consumer behavior has changed and they know that they can buy something and get it delivered to their house frozen or refrigerated. That means that they can get anything from anywhere. This is a funny example, but my mom's favorite cake is made in New York City. She's gonna visit me in Miami in the next couple of weeks, and guess what I'm doing for her? I'm buying the cake, and it gets delivered frozen to my house, which, now all of you know that, I know that, and consumer behavior has changed. So for us at ButcherBox, it was like, hey, how are we solving this? And then for me personally is, why are we spending millions of dollars trying to solve for this internally? So that's what just led me to step down from my role and then start Grip, which is that solution that we always wish we had when starting ButcherBox and then through scale as well.
I think the evolution, too, of shipping perishable goods has been pretty interesting in that, like, when we first started at Plated, it was everything, went into a box and you put as much possible ice as you could and as much possible insulation as you could, and you just put it into FedEx's hands and said, all right, it will show up because, it's FedEx. We can trust them. But, we over time, as we kind of built complexity, into the business, we realized, oh, we probably shouldn't do it that way anymore. So talk about some of that, like as you start to go from the full outsourcing model and like to the twisting and turning the dials and adjusting, like how do direct-to-consumer companies inject other modes of transportation or balance the kind of the different elements of putting a box together?
So the highest level concept of that is how do I move from a static network into a dynamic network? And what that means is what is every single one of the variables that I can change dynamically so that I am increasing the probability of success when I send a box to my customer. So what I mean by this is you can think about a static decision-making model for sending a direct-to-consumer perishable box as, hey, every time I'm going to ship a box to California, it's going to come from this facility, it's going to go out with this liner, with this box, on this day of the week, and with, let's say, 10 pounds of dry ice or X amount of refrigeration. That's a static decision-making. It has evolved now with the technology and all the data flow and systems that we have in place to make it completely dynamic, which is, hey, here are the variables that I can change, here are the models that I'm playing with, and how am I changing these to, one, make sure I'm taking care of the customer from point A to point B, and two, make sure that I'm making money while I'm doing this. Because, margins are, as you know from the industry, are not the best. You're not speaking about, SaaS or software margins. You're speaking about, 5-10% margins, if even when it comes to shipping direct to consumers online. So, it's about, hey, how do I take those variables and how do I make this dynamic so that, one, I'm spending a premium where I have to take care of my customer, but then I'm also taking cost out of the equation so that then I have a positive impact to my bottom line. And then it goes both ways. Right? Because if you don't take care of the customer, then at the end of the day, you already paid to acquire the customer through your marketing channels, and then they're opening a box, something perishable. Quite often it is either something you're going to feed your family with, or something you're going to have for a party that you want delivered, or something like flowers, and you don't want to mess up a flower delivery. So at that point is, how do I make sure I increase probability of success by adding the proper refrigerant, by making sure I'm shipping with the right insulation, the right time of the day, the proper carrier, the proper origin point, and how do I combine all these things to increase probability of success, take care of the customer where I have to, increase lifetime value for my customer, but then, hey, it's minus 5 degrees in Chicago, the carrier is performing at 99.5% on-time delivery, and I see no complaints from my customers. I can take insulation out, maybe I can afford not shipping it with a premium service, and then I can take refrigerant out, and that's where you make your margin. Taking care of the customer, and then cutting costs where you can.
One thing we always notice too, at least shipping meal kits, and I'm sure you heard this complaint too, the amount of packaging, insulation, box waste that each customer has. Like, sure, there's an opportunity too whenever you've got that to, that negative 5 degree temperature in Chicago, which thankfully it's 80 degrees here in Chattanooga today, the opportunity to just kind of pull out some of those costs, but in a way that actually benefits the customer and that, the waste isn't quite there anymore.
Totally. I mean, and I think that even worse than that, the biggest side of that waste comes from when you're not paying the premium to get to the customer, when you could have known that it's a problem that could have been prevented with the right data and right decision making. So I'll give you all an example. If you're shipping a box to California and you know that that lane is going to be impacted by a wildfire in the summer, if you know that beforehand, you can do two things. One is, hey, before shipping that box, you can tell the customer, hey, I noticed that this lane is going to be impacted by a wildfire. We can, hold your box or ship it to a different location or provide the customer with solutions. On the other end, if you already shipped that box and you didn't notice and you know that you're going to have waste while getting to that customer, then you can call the customer and give them a heads up. At that point, you're basically taking what would have been a bad experience, flipping it on its head, and making it a very good experience for your customer because they know that you're taking care of them. So I think that's where the biggest part of the waste comes from. When you're shipping a meal kit that has hundreds of dollars worth of food inside, but you're not necessarily being proactive about, hey, this box could be impacted by a wildfire, which means that it has a 15% chance of getting there successfully. Why am I even shipping it? So when you have the data and you play it in your favor to then benefit the customer, I think that's the biggest impact that you can have.
So do you think that over time, like, this industry, shipping perishables, kind of started with like fresh, like produce and vegetables and like frozen meat, and like you guys, you drove the whole frozen meat delivery, like from the cradle to all, and that's still a successful business going. But like we've seen a lot more introduction of frozen foods that are being shipped through the mail, through parcel. Is that easier to do, or is that harder to do, given that it needs to stay frozen?
So frozen is generally easier than fresh, because fresh you have to stay within a very particular range of temperature, and then inventory management is much more complex. So when you add those two variables, it's more complex. In the frozen side, you have to stay under 32 degrees. Most of the frozen inventory is stored much more, colder than that, at -5 or -10. But you're shipping with dry ice. The dry ice, the temperature of block dry ice is, -100 degrees. And when you do that, you have a much bigger range of temperature that you can keep the product at. Now, you don't want to go too cold, because at that point you can be damaging the packaging of the product itself when you get too cold, and the plastic specifically, but you still have a much wider range. And then, for growing companies, inventory management is just so much easier with the frozen, because you can keep it for longer. Fresh, you have lettuce for a few days, and if you don't use it, it goes bad. So you have to be very, very careful on how you're managing that inventory and doing demand planning for your sites.
The downside of some of these, missing a delivery, for the fire example that you provided, but like just kind of messing up as a company, thinking that through, you're having a bad experience, which itself is a churn-inducing event for most customers. But then the company I worked for was like, oh, we can get them a new box. Like we can get it, this was supposed to be delivered on Tuesday. Let's get it there on Thursday. We'll overnight it. We'll pay the extra. You end up underwater on that box by negative 100% margins, like usually minimum. Like there's a whole different way to be thinking about that when you're being proactive. So looking forward, Juan, like you've talked about customer preferences changing. Like how do we see that like impact? Like do you think that changes your modes of transportation that you're going to start using? How does that impact grip shipping?
So I think the biggest impact comes from being able to understand what are the different touch points of the supply chain that you can change dynamically, and then taking the end customer's feedback and closing that loop and bringing that feedback to the forefront of the equation. So that if you already know that you're messing up box by sending them X way, you need to be as fast as you can to take that information, bringing it to the forefront of the cycle, and then react very fast. Because if you don't, then that's where what you're saying happens, which is, hey, I need to reship a box, which costs a bunch of money, and then you most likely end up losing that customer. So for us as a company, what we're most focused on is how do we take every single touch point of that equation so that we're making better decisions to reduce waste and provide a better customer experience. As an example, when the fulfillment process is finished, box gets packed, added to a pallet, that pallet to a truck, and then that truck gets scanned out of the dock. And then how much time does it go from when that box is scanned out of the dock into when it's delivered into the final customer? So final mile carriers usually work with the same routes, and they're usually hitting the same zip codes at the same time of the day. So how are you taking that and planning for how much refrigerant are you planning to add to the box? And then, hey, is that a business address or is that a residential address? So is someone going to be home to receive that box or no?
Right.
So how are you taking all the data and then bringing it to the forefront so that you can make better decisions to then service that customer better? So for us is, how do we use all the data traceability throughout the journey to make better decisions, improve margins, and improve lifetime value of the customer?
Awesome. Well, hey, Juan, thank you so much for coming up here, talking to us. We're fortunately out of time, but fortunately for us, it's beer 30 here at Freight Alley. So thanks everybody for joining us, and look forward to seeing you out there tonight.
Thank you.
Great, man. Thank you.
All right, you heard Spencer. It's